Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to Uncivil Law, where we learn through the misfortunes of others. As always, I hope you'll enjoy this live legal education content, and today may be the day I earn your subscription. For our second live story this evening, we're going to be talking about a doctor who was convicted of some very bad things. A neurosurgeon who is currently serving life in prison because of the very bad things. And this story was inspired / suggested by many of you, the uncivilians, in response to our last story where we did about the plastic surgeon who's currently facing some very serious allegations in a lawsuit against him, or apologize, actually kind of the other way around. He sued for defamation for the mean thing someone else was saying, and she is exposing a lot of things. And I, yours truly, was very incredulous about some of these allegations because they sounded very implausible. But she brought sufficient evidence to my mind to say, this is a lot of stuff, but there's a lot of evidence to support the stuff. So I don't see that defamation lawsuit going very well. It's definitely something we're going to follow. But not so much today with defamation as criminal law. This is the case involving Christopher Duntsch, a surgeon who is now in jail for the rest of his life because of various horrible things that he did. And I think it goes to show that there are just horrible people in every profession. And I think that the vast, vast, vast majority of doctors are good people, just like any other profession. And there are bad people in all kinds of professions. People are there for bad reasons and bad motives. And some people are just plain evil in some professions. So I don't know if this is as much a story about regulatory issues or supervision issues by medical boards or things like that, although there is certainly some criticism to be had there. I think it's more of a story of just, that the plastic surgeon, well, first of all, isn't alone, and second of all, isn't the worst of it. So it gets worse. So let's read this article. This is an article that is summarizing the story, the true story of Christopher Duntsch, the killer surgeon known as Dr. Death. Now, this is from 2011 to 2013. Dozens of patients in the Dallas area woke up after surgeries with horrible pain, numbness, and paralysis. Even worse, some of the patients never got the chance to wake up. And it's all because of one surgeon named Christopher Duntsch, a.a. Dr. Death. So in 2 years, he worked on 38 patients, and 31 of them had very serious complications: paralysis, serious injury, and death. This is not a good track record. This is not a good 31 critical failures out of 38 is not inspiring. Yeah. Duntsch's career started off bright. He graduated from a top-tier medical school, was running research labs, and completed a residency program for neurosurgeon. Kind of things you would do for neurosurgery. However, things then went south, and here is the doctor in his former days and also in his mugshot. A podcast called Dr. Death is breaking down the deranged surgeon criminal activities and shows how drug abuse and blinding overconfidence led to big trouble for patients who found themselves underneath the doctor's knife. So for those of you who are interested, there is a podcast series about this called Dr. Death. If you want to go into it, someone on the channel says it's 6 parts if you want to learn more about this horror show. So, that's, yeah. Christopher Duntsch was born in Montana in 1971, 10 years my senior. Raised alongside 3 siblings in an affluent suburb of Memphis, Tennessee. His father was a missionary and physical therapist, and his mother was a school teacher. Duntsch received his undergrad from the University of Memphis, a fine school, and stayed in town to receive an MD and a PhD from the University of Tennessee, also a very fine school. According to D Magazine, he did so well in medical school that he was allowed to join the prestigious Alpha Omega Medical Honor Society. I have no knowledge about what that means or not, but whatever. So University of Tennessee, graduate for his MD, PhD. You know, respectable. He did surgical residency at the University of Tennessee in Memphis, spending 5 years studying neurosurgery and a year studying general surgery. During the time, he ran 2 successful labs and raised millions of dollars in grant funding, according to Rolling Stone. A promising career. Around 2006 and 2007, Duntsch became unhinged. According to Megan Kane, an ex-girlfriend, she saw him eat a paper blotter of LSD and take prescription pain blotters on his birthday. So what exactly do we mean by a paper blotter? Do we mean the entire blotter? Or do we mean just a section of the blotter? Because if you had an entire blotter of LSD, you're going to have a bad time. If you mean just one panel where it's like usually 100 or 200, it won't be... Yeah, it's not recommended, but still. She also said that he kept a pile of cocaine on his dresser in his home office. Well, a doctor on drugs is not exactly unheard of. What is true in the medical profession, true in the legal profession, is that there is a higher than normal amount of substance abuse, and there's a higher than normal amount of self-deletion. I believe the rate among lawyers is about 3 times the national average. I don't know for doctors what their multiplier is, but I believe they're in the same kind of territory, if not a little bit higher. The substance abuse profiles are very, very similar. The reasons are many for both. Both professions can be high stress jobs, require a lot of time, a lot of dedication. Both can be mentally exhausting. Both cases, you deal with a lot of disappointment. People's lives are on the line. Complications happen. Sometimes people get hurt, and that can cause. And sometimes you have to help people you don't really want to help. In both professions, there are people that you prefer not to help, but sometimes you have to because your professional obligations. So, the incidence of self-harm, the incidence of depression, the incidence of substance abuse are higher among lawyers and doctors by at least a couple, like triple, compared to normal population. So it's not particularly surprising there. Kane also recalled a cocaine and LSD-fueled night of partying between her ex-boyfriend, and Duntsch, where, after the end, he put on a lab coat and went to work. Yeah, that probably happens sometimes. Duntsch may not be unique in this regard. According to D Magazine, a doctor at the hospital where Duntsch worked, he said that Duntsch had been sent to an impaired physician program after refusal to take a drug test. Despite this refusal, he's allowed to complete residency. So, as part of his residency program, they have drug tests. He refused to take it. So they sent him to a program, and they let him complete his residency, which, I can't really speak to, whether or not that's a good idea or not, but that's what happened in that case. So after he arrived in Dallas, he secured a deal with Baylor Regional Medical Center at Plano and was given surgical rights at the hospital. Over the course of 2 years, Christopher Duntsch operated on 38 patients in the Dallas area. Of those 38, 31 were left paralyzed or seriously injured, and 2 of them died from surgical complications. Through it all, one way Duntsch was able to lure patient after patient under night was his extreme confidence. Yeah, that can be a trait of someone you want this is a trait of lawyers and a trait of doctors, and I can think of lawyers that I know who display extreme confidence, and I think sometimes confidence is good, but sometimes I feel like the confidence is unwarranted. So, but it's like, who do you want as a lawyer? Do you want someone like me? And there are plenty of people who like people like me, so it's not like I'm hurting for business or anything. But is it like, do you want someone like me who's going to provide a much more nuanced approach, who's going to be like, well, it could be this, it could be this, and it's a little bit of, I'm not sure. Or do you want a lawyer who's going to be like, yeah, absolutely no problem, we're going to do that, we're going to, absolutely going to win and crush it. If they have the things to back up the confidence, it's great. If not, then, it's a problem. So, but a lot of people find that very attractive. Dr. Mark Hoyle, a surgeon who worked with Duntsch during one of his botched procedures, told the magazine he'd make extremely arrogant statements such as everyone before working with him. Oh, this is one of those articles that skips parts because of when you print it to a PDF. It skips things, so it skips text. So we'll just do it as best we can. So we're missing part of the sentence. So he made an arrogant announcement, which we don't know what it is. Before working with him, Dr. Hoyle said he didn't know how to feel about a fellow surgeon. I thought he was either really, really good or just really, really arrogant and thought he was good. It's hard to tell the difference sometimes, yeah. He might have been fired from the institute, but he was still a surgeon. One of the patients who suffered disastrous consequences was Jennifer Summers, the boyfriend of Meghan Kane and a friend of Duntsch. In February 2012, he went under the knife for elective spinal fusion surgery. When he woke up, he was quadriplegic with incomplete paralysis. This means he could still feel pain, but was unable to move from the neck down. Well, that sounds like a fate worse than death to me, man. Geez, just end me at that point, to be honest. I'm serious, too. I'm not even kidding. I'm telling you right now, if I ever wind up with locked-in syndrome or some sort of paralysis like that, just end me, please. I don't want this. This is not any value of life that I recognize. I'm not even kidding. This is the kind of things that horror shows are made of, to my mind. Duntsch's first casualty was when she bled out. So this is, Duntsch had his first surgical rights temporarily. Yeah, it's why medicals with powers of attorney and advanced directors are so important. You might be right, Stephanie. Maybe I need to write one. Man, geez, Lord. Duntsch had his medical rights temporarily suspended after his botched surgery on Summers, and was his first patient back was a 55-year-old Kelly Martin. The first casualty was when she bled out in intensive care after a relatively common procedure. Following these blunders, Duntsch resigned from Baylor Plano in April 2012 before they could fire him. He was brought on board at Dallas Medical Center where he continued his carnage. So he's moved from hospital to hospital before they can fire him. And these other medical facilities apparently are not following up. They're not reporting him to the relevant authorities, the medical boards. They're like, well, he's no longer a problem, I guess, but that's completely the wrong attitude, It's no good. Yes, it's just completely the wrong attitude, but it happens, it's... His very first operation in the hospital once again turned deadly. So at this new hospital, it also turned deadly. Florella Brown went under the knife in July 2012, and shortly after surgery suffered a massive stroke caused by Duntsch slicing her vertebral artery during the surgery. That day Brown suffered a stroke, Duntsch operated again. So he's just going from patient to patient, man. This patient came to have two vertebrae fused, but when she woke up, she experienced severe pain and couldn't stand. A CT scan would later reveal that her nerve root had been amputated. There were several screw holes nowhere near where they were supposed to be, and one screw had lodged into another nerve root. Just end me, man. I mean, just end me, man. Lord. Dr. Death was fired before the end of his first week for the damage he suffered. Bye, Water on Mars. After several more months of botched surgeries, Duntsch finally lost his surgical privileges, although altogether in June of 2013, after two physicians complained to the Texas Medical Board. So finally got around to him. eventually, it took long enough. In July 2015, a grand jury indicted Dr. Death on 5 counts of aggravated assault and 1 count of harming an elderly person, his patient, Mary Efford. He is sentenced to life imprisonment and is currently appealing, which, not so much about that. And I thought maybe we could read the original grand jury indictment as well from Texas. Now, what's interesting about this, and I don't know if this is standard procedure or not, but this guy, when he was sentenced, the jury recommended his sentence. Some states do that. I don't know if Texas does or not. I'm still not licensed in Texas. I'm still operating on my national license. So I don't know the law in Texas. But yeah, apparently the jury heard it and they recommended life imprisonment, and that's what he's getting. So let's read this indictment that was filed by the great state of Texas. Aggravated assault causing serious injury. The grand jury for Dallas says that Christopher Daniel Duntsch, hereafter called defendant, on the 10th day of June of 2013, in Dallas, did willfully therein and intentionally, knowingly, and recklessly cause serious bodily injury to Jeff Glidwell, hereinafter called the complainant, by cutting the esophagus and cutting the vertebral artery and occluding the vertebral artery and leaving a sponge inside the complainant's body. Defendant did use a deadly weapon, hands and surgical tools during the commission thereof. Intentionally, knowingly, recklessly, doing all those things. In the court, on the 10th day of June in 2013, defendant did unlawfully and thereon knowingly and caused bodily injury to Jeff Glidwell by cutting the esophagus and cutting the vertebral artery and used a deadly weapon. Yeah, that's a lot of stuff. During the commission of the assault. That's great. Injury to a child or elder or disabled person. The grand jury charges that Christopher Daniel Duntsch, on the 25th day of July of 2012, in the county of Dallas, Texas, did unlawfully and intentionally, knowingly, recklessly, and with criminal negligence, cause serious bodily injury to Mary Efford, an elderly individual, 65 years or older, by malpositioning an inner body device and malpositioning pedicile screws and amputating the left L5 nerve root by using hands and surgical tools and a pedicile screw. Aggravated assault. On the 25th day of June, caused the aggravated assault to the same person. So this is a separate charge for the same individual. Aggravated assault. On the 10th day of September 2012, did unlawfully and there intentionally, knowingly, and recklessly cause serious bodily injury to Jeff Cheney, hereinafter called complainant, by removing an excessive amount of bone from the vertebral body and penetrating the spinal cord and using blunt force on the spinal cord and using sharp force on the spinal cord and using a peak cage that was the wrong size. Yeah. On 24th day of June of 2012, in Floria Brown, malpositioning an intra-body device and excessive amount of bone from the vertebral body and cutting the left vertebral artery and occluding the left venerable artery and disregarding complainant's excessive blood loss during the surgery. On the 6th day of March 2013, Jennifer Rich, using the wrong size pedicile screw and cutting the vena cava and cutting the possidus muscle and damaging the nerve roots near the possidus muscle. So yeah, that was a lot of stuff. And the history of this guy is pretty interesting. A lot of it sounds like incompetence and non-intent. And Matt raises a good point. This, the prosecutor almost didn't bring this case. They waited almost to the last minute to bring the case. The guy lost his license, went to Colorado, got into some DUIs, got into rehab and all kinds of shit. And they almost didn't bring the case because trying to prove the difference between just incompetence and intentionality is hard. But it was the pattern. It was the pattern that did it. Like each of them individually, you could write off as a mistake instead of like criminal intent. But, you know, because you have the pattern of conduct, the 31 cases of 38, you know, that show this ongoing pattern, the jury found that he did it intentionally. The jury found that he did these things purposefully. He botched these surgeries out of some sort of malicious desire. Why call it assault and not malpractice? One's a civil thing. So malpractice is a civil complaint. There's no crime called malpractice. This is the complaint from the grand jury. The grand jury can't charge him with malpractice. That's a civil matter. The grand jury wants to charge him with aggravated assault, an injury to a child, aggravated assault. So that's why. The Med Board suspended him finally in 2013 and revoked his license. Yeah, it's a lot of stuff. So yeah, and we could read his Wikipedia article because his Wikipedia article is also fascinating. So let me just download his Wikipedia article real fast. Give me just 1 second to do that, and we'll talk about that as well because it's fascinating. Yeah, let's read his let's read from his Wikipedia because it's depressing and it gives a little bit more detail about some of his many misdeeds. All right, well, we'll pick it up as he starts in Plano. So early in his tenure, this would be, now, he joined, so his name appears on papers and patents. He was $500,000 in debt. He spent 15 years training. His CV was 12 pages, single-spaced. So he joins Baylor Regional Medical Center at Plano for a salary of $600,000 per year, plus bonuses. So he has a lot of debt, but he also has a lot of salary. So I guess the $500,000 of debt is worth it if you can get a $600,000 debt salary. Now, that's going to take a sizable chunk out of his salary for a couple of years. But still, I mean, he's by no means poor. He's doing fine for himself. Of course, he has to pay malpractice and other things beyond that. But, you know, he's not struggling for money with $600,000 a year. So, you know, if you want someone who's going to be doing spine surgery, they probably are worth $600,000 a year. I'm just guessing. So early on in his career, Duntsch made a poor impression on his fellow surgeons. Veteran vascular surgeon Kirby recalled that Duntsch frequently boasted about his abilities despite being new to the area. Kirby also recalled that his skills in the operating room left much to be desired. As Kirby put it, he could not wield a scalpel. That's not encouraging. Several of his patients resulted in severely maimed patients. Kenneth Fennell, his first patient, was left in chronic pain after he operated on the wrong part of his back. Due to the debilitating pain, he later had a second operation to relieve it, was left significantly paralyzed in his legs. Required months of rehabilitation to be able to walk with a cane, and was unable to walk more than 30 feet or stand for a few minutes without having to sit down again. Lee Passmore, a medical investigator, experienced chronic pain and limited mobility after Duntsch cut a ligament which was not normally touched during that particular procedure. Misplaced hardware in his spine. That's definitely a place you want to lose your washers and your screws in another guy's spine. Placed the screw which kept the hardware in place in an incorrect location in the spine, and stripped the threads so it could not be removed. He also placed the screw in a location that would have caused him to bleed out if it had been removed. The vascular surgeon who assisted later called Duntsch seemed so oblivious to considerable bleeding. He became so disturbed that at one point he considered restraining him. He later told Duntsch to his face that he was dangerous. Barry Mulgroff, the owner of a pool service company, was left with bone fragments in the spinal canal after Duntsch tried to pull a damaged disc out of his back with a grabbing tool. Duntsch initially refused to give him any pain meds. Duntsch initially refused to give him any pain medication, calling him a drug seeker. The pool service guy eventually lost most of the function on his left side, required a wheelchair. Kirby, assistant in the surgery, called Duntsch continuing making mistakes even after having the correct anatomy pointed out to him. Pool guy later recalled that he walked out of a follow-up visit with Duntsch when he displayed clear signs of being inebriated. Jenny Summers came to Plano to have 2 neck vertebrae fused. During the operation, Summers was rendered a quadriplegic. The anesthesiologist who worked on the surgery called Summers lost almost 1.2 liters of blood, more than a fifth of the blood volume, and almost 24 times the amount of blood lost in this kind of operation. The nurses and other staffers who took part in the surgery fully expected to have revision surgery, but Duntsch refused to do it. Summers later stated that Duntsch had used cocaine the night before the surgery. Despite having passed a drug test, Baylor Plano officials were concerned enough to force Duntsch on leave pending peer review. When Duntsch was cleared to resume operating while the review was underway, hospital officials asked him to limit himself to minor surgeries. Summers subsequently admitted the cocaine claim was untrue and stated he was upset Duntsch refused to check on him. Summers remained a quadriplegic for the rest of his life, died in 2021 from complications from the operation. Keely Martin suffered major arterial injury during a routine back operation. He continued despite clear signs that he was losing massive amounts of blood, refused to abort the surgery even after the trauma surgeon colleague and anesthesiologist warned him about blood loss. He refused to acknowledge anything was wrong, hindering the ICU team's effort to save him. When Martin awoke from anesthesia, she was screaming and clawing at her legs, forcing ICU to re-anesthetize her. Duntsch also stayed at the ICU waiting room, writing notes rather than attending to his patient, even after they went into cardiac arrest, and then he bled to death. He moved to Dallas Medical Center, where he was granted temporary privileges until they could obtain his records. Red flags early on, as the nurses wondered if he was under the influence. He came to work wearing the same tattered scrubs for 3 days in a row. Wow. You know, I'm just a simple country lawyer, but I think that re-wearing the same scrubs 3 days in a row might be an indication. All may not be well. Yeah. He lasted less than a week after the death of Flora Brown and maiming of another Mary F. Renard. After leaving Dallas, he received privileges at Southampton Community Hospital in Dallas and took a job at outpatient clinic named Legacy Surgery Center. While there, he damaged a patient's spinal cord, leaving him without feeling on the right side of his body. He damaged the patient's spinal cord, drilling into it and leaving him partially paralyzed from the neck down. While attempting to remove this degenerated disc in Marshall Tech's Muse's back, he left surgical hardware in between the spine and muscle tissue. He woke up in considerable pain, but Duntsch convinced him it was normal. He then prescribed him so much Percocet that a pharmacist refused to fill it. That's a lot of Percocet, man. I'm just saying. And the pharmacist is saying now? When operating on Jacqueline Troy, Duntsch cut one of her vocal cords and an artery, as well as her trachea. Left barely able to speak above a whisper, had to be sedated for weeks, had to be fed through a feeding tube. Despite these mishaps, he was retained by Southampton when new honors brought it and renamed it University General Hospital. When he applied for privileges at Methodist Hospital, the hospital queried the MPDB, which I don't know what that is exactly, but soon afterward, he severely maimed Jeff Glidwell after mistaking part of the neck muscle for a tumor. Duntsch left a surgical sponge in Gladwell's throat to staunch the bleeding. However, he closed with the sponge in place despite others in the operating room warning him that he was doing it. The sponge triggered a severe blood infection, you don't say, that caused him to become septic. When other people discovered it, Duntsch refused to return to help remove it. After several days, Kirby was brought in to repair the damage, and later described what he found after opening him back up as the work of a crazed maniac. He told Glidwell that it was clear Duntsch had tried to kill him. Glidwell was left only with one vocal cord, permanent damage to esophagus, and partial paralysis on the left side. Kirby claimed it looked as though Duntsch had tried to decapitate him. Oof. That is a horrendous career, man. You know? I don't know what went wrong. He completed his residency having participated in fewer than 100 surgeries. Typically, neurosurgeon residents participate in 1,000 surgeries. Oof. That's a lot of stuff, man. That's a lot of stuff, man. MPDB is a database for malpractice payments. Yeah. That's a lot, man. Stephanie, this is a lot. This is a lot, man. I'm not sure what the takeaway lesson here is. I'm not sure what the takeaway lesson is. Is there a takeaway lesson? I don't know that it's obvious that any of these patients could have done anything to protect themselves. I don't know what the takeaway lesson is. It's just really, really disturbing. And Stephanie, it must be even more disturbing for you, given your background as a paramedic. Like, I don't even have a health background. You have a health background. And this is a horror show. Yeah, you did tell me. It's a lot. It's a lot, man. This is depressing. I'll read a little bit about the criminal charges. Okay, so his license was revoked in 2000 or suspended in 2013. And then it was revoked formally in December 2013. So it was suspended in June of 2013, revoked in December of 2013. He moved to Colorado, went on to a downward spiral. He declared bankruptcy. He was arrested for DUI. And he was arrested in Dallas for shoplifting some pants. 3 of the former patients sued, and then his former patients also wanted criminal prosecution. So they urged the Dallas County District Attorney to pursue the criminal charges. The inquiry went nowhere until 2015 when the statute of limitations was due to run out. And this is where it notes for the problem from the legal perspective for the criminal case. I mean, you have civil cases all day long, but for a criminal case, part of the problem was being able to prove the actions were willful as defined by Texas law. Right? Is this just a bad doctor, or is it something more nefarious? So the prosecutors had to interview dozens of patients and survivors. Prosecutors conclude that they were criminal based on the pattern. So, like, yeah, this is part of the reason why it took so long to bring charges criminally, because criminal is different than civil, and in an individual case, it can be extremely hard to tell the difference. And for the prosecutors here, they waited till basically the last minute to bring this because they had to convince themselves they could get there. As part of the investigation, prosecutors obtained a December 2011 email in which Duntsch boasted that he was ready to leave the love and kindness and goodness and patience that I mix with everything else that I am and become a cold-blooded killer. Well, that's kind of incriminating. That's kind of incriminating. Little bit incriminating there. Little bit incriminating here. Email from Dutch in December 2011, not clear to who, but Dutch says, I am ready to leave the love and kindness and goodness and patience that I mix with everything else I am and become a cold-blooded killer. Well, that's pretty revealing. That goes a long way to showing some intent. Wow. The ADA, who led the prosecution, later recalled that Henderson, Kirby, and Lasser reached out demanding to testify, which is weird because doctors usually never testify against each other. Yeah, yeah. In an article for the Texas Prosecutor, the Journal of the Texas District and County Attorneys, the other members of the trial team recalled that supervisors were initially skeptical when presented the case for the reasons that I kind of just said, right? It can be very hard to prove criminality in a medical case, but eventually found themselves in overwhelming disbelief a surgeon could do what they did. Yeah, I mean, you come to me as a prosecutor, I'm going to be skeptical too. I can't blame them, man. As the trial team put it, the scary pattern of actions became apparent to others in the office, leaving the DAs to go to the grand jury. So in 2015, he's arrested, 6 felony counts. It was made 4 months before statute of limitations was meant to leave out. The last charge was for maiming and paralyzing a Ferd. Gave high priority charge as it provided the widest sentencing range with facing up to life imprisonment. Easiest to prove because he had been told repeatedly he wasn't placing in the correct position, and the images proved it. Prosecutors sought sentences long enough they'd never be able to practice medicine again. Prosecutors opted to try Duntsch for effort maiming first. He was appointed a lawyer because, he was broke. Prosecutors called many other patients to stand in order to prove the charges were intentional. Yeah, so this is another reason, like, you can bring in prior bad acts, right? It's to show absence of mistake, right? So the prior bad acts rule, right? You can't bring in prior bad acts to prove a charge. But there are exceptions. And strictly speaking, you aren't using it to prove a charge. In this case, you're using it to rebut an affirmative defense, but tell the jury the difference, right? So here you're not bringing in all these other patients to show that he did bad things in the past. You're doing it to show he did a bad thing here. Because one of his things is mistake, right? Mistake. I had a mistake. It was just negligence. It was just carelessness. All right? So you can bring in all that prior bad act stuff to show absence of mistake. No, it isn't a mistake. And I can prove it's not a mistake because you've done the same thing multiple times. So it's not a mistake now either. Right? So that's a prior bad act exception. So yeah, you bring in all those people to show absence of mistake. Strictly speaking, you aren't using it to show propensity, but again, tell the jury to split the difference, right? Duntsch's defense blamed their client's actions on poor training and lack of oversight. Well, the lack of oversight might be a problem, but it doesn't go to his liability. The jury needed only 4 hours to convict him, and he was sentenced to life. The Texas Court of Appeals affirmed the conviction 2-1. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals refused to review. And now the 4 hospitals have cases going against them. So that is finalized, and he is not eligible for parole until 2045 when he'll be 74, and I'm not particularly likely that he will get The prosecution has been called precedent as is believed to be the first time a physician has been convicted on criminal charges in the course of his medical work. I don't know about ever, but maybe in the state of Texas. So that's a lot of shit, man. That's a lot of shit. Yeah. I don't know what the one vote was for, neither do you, anyone else. I mean, yeah, I don't know what the one vote was for, and, you know, the law is the law. The law is the law, and I can't speak to what the one issue is. Maybe it was about the propensity evidence. I mean, that would be a valid reason to appeal, right? I mean, I know the rule and I know the exception, but perhaps it went too far. So, I mean, I'm not going to say that the judge who voted to overturn was necessarily legally wrong. He might have been legally right. If I had to guess, it would be based on the propensity evidence, right? Because it became so unduly prejudicial, right? You didn't need to bring in all those to show absence of mistake. It became unduly prejudicial. So, you know, appellate courts do what appellate courts should do, which is focus on the law. And so I don't know that the one person was wrong without reading the decision. Maybe he was right. And maybe the people, maybe they're both right. It's just a difference of how far should this be allowed to go. Because when you start bringing in stuff, it can inflame the passion of the jury, as you might expect, right? It's substantially more prejudicial than probative. So, you know, there's arguments to be made legally. So, you know, on a pragmatic matter, I'm happy he's in jail on the law, you know, but I care about the law. So I don't know which way is right, but, you know, there's a legal issue to be had there. I've often thought about switching from medicine to law and going after medical providers, but the problem is getting support within the medical community. There are lots of people who are willing to testify against doctors, lots of people who are doctors who will testify. I mean, there's whole professions for it. But sure, go get that joint JD, MD. Go for it, man. One of the victims was also his childhood friend. That's really annoying. That's really annoying. I'll read the super chat, and then I'll read some stuff, and then I'll, I guess, press on with other things. Sorry in advance, by the way, if I don't do live streams in the next couple days. I have a lot of work to do, and we'll try to post regular stories. We got some stuff in the queue, but I got a lot to do, and bear with me, but we'll try to make it all work in the back end so you guys won't miss anything. $19.99 from Johnny F. Face. There's an extremely detailed 6-part deep dive called Dr. Death on the Wondery website. Tons of cover-ups, his employers and universities. The details are much worse than I could have believed. He was not only unskilled, but evil. I believe that fully as well. Yeah. Stephanie says, the fact that we need reform. So patients who try to do their due diligence know he was doing this and had a record like this before consenting to surgery. Yeah. See something, say something, even if it's a professional colleague, Stephanie says. I think you're right. Haley Crump makes an interesting observation. Since this was professional error, comparison was discussed in Potter. Any comment on the difference between her 1 error in 25 years and this guy 90% error rate? Haley, you raise a very fair point. And I think doctors, like cops, are very, very rarely prosecuted. And some of this is due to sentiment at the time. So maybe if public perception changes, maybe a lot more doctors will, you know, abolish the doctors. Maybe if there's an abolish the doctors movement, we'll get more of this. But cops and doctors it's difficult to get to them criminally for what happens in their profession, even if it technically reads on what's going on. So, yeah. Matthew says, what surprises me is the ABA has rules requiring you to whistleblow, but medicine doesn't have that rule. Couldn't speak to medical ethics rules. I don't know. I'm going to end the stream for now. Lots of hospitals have binding arbitration as part of their consent. This is true. This is very, very true. Stephanie, you're 100% right. This is very true. I would. So this is all for now. If you've enjoyed the stream, I hope you will give it a like. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and remember to join and all the rest of the YouTube things. I'm going to head off for now. Until later, my friends, I hope all is well. Sorry for the slightly depressing story, but this kind of stuff does need to be exposed. And until later, my friends, have a good one. Bye.